In his essay, Freedom of Opportunity, Not Equality of Opportunity, economist George Reisman writes, quote, an opportunity is merely an occasion on which successful action is possible. It is a situation that an individual can take advantage to his gain. What needs to be realized about opportunities is, first of all, that there are no scarcity of them. They arise again and again. That's a great quote for the everyday Joe, reminding us that opportunities are all around. From there, it's only a matter of positioning ourselves to seize the moment. Unfortunately, lawmakers seem to have gotten that memo as well, and they keep themselves busy with the never ending opportunities to pass legislation. All right, good morning. Once again, thank you for tuning in so early to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. And if you're tuning in live, I especially thank you for giving me your time so early. I want to remind everybody that I am streaming on Rumble now. It's a bit wonky. We'll get there. Got some things to work out, but I will have the channel set up fully and up and running 100% before long. If you're not following me there, you can easily do so by going over to rumble.libertydad.com and clicking the follow button. The more people I get there, the more incentive it is to really put all my effort into Rumble rather than YouTube. And you can go back to one of my past episodes where I talked about why I would want to move to Rumble in the first place. So that is a work in progress, but we are there. And thank you for everybody that has helped me get there. So moving on. Today, we got some bill reviews to do. Now I'm going to do these a little bit differently than I normally do, and that's okay. But we're going to try to approach these bill reviews in a way that's meaningful, so that you, the audience, can have the best takeaway possible. So the two bills this morning are HB 4139. It's out of Massachusetts. And then there's a new Senate bill. It does not yet have a number. I believe it was just introduced, and that is called the Stop Child Labor Act. Now, my show prep on this was a bit light, so I might, it may be a little bit trying to make things as smooth as possible. But I am a one man band here, and getting everything all prepped and ready and set up so that the show flows smoothly, well, that can be quite a challenge. So I kind of want to put that out there right now, just because I was trying to do the show prep and I was like, all right, I want this to be here and I want this to play at this moment. But it can be challenging. But we are going to get there, folks. Let me get some of this information up here, catching up on bill reviews, and then my little logo here. Where's my little logo? There we are, right up there. All right, awesome. So let's do this first bill review. Now, I'm going to pull it up on the screen so that we can take a look, and we're going to read just a little bit of this news article. Okay, we're not going to read the whole thing because it's totally not necessary. So let's pull that up on the screen here, and there we are. Okay, awesome. So let's zoom in a little bit so that we can see. Uh, there, I think that works. All right, so Massachusetts House passes sweeping new gun control bill, and this was October 18th, so just a couple of weeks ago. And let's see what they say here. So, the Massachusetts House of Representatives on Wednesday voted overwhelmingly to pass a comprehensive new gun reform package that would make the state's already renowned gun control laws even stricter. As written, the measure would strengthen the state's assault weapons ban, limit where guns can be carried, and crack down on unregistered so called ghost guns. It also would expand the state's red flag law, which allows a judge to suspend the gun license of someone deemed at risk to harm themselves or others. And here's the interesting part: the House passed the bill 120 to 38 over the opposition of gun owners and police chiefs. So, like, even the police were like, hey, this bill's a red flag in itself. Quote, modernizing our firearms statutes is not an attack on anyone's rights. Quote, Stoneham Representative Michael Day, the bill's author, said during Wednesday's session. So let's think about that for a second. This is clever rhetoric, and this is the reason why shows like this need to exist. This is why us libertarians, and others who are in the liberty sphere really need to get out there and start combating some of this information. Modernizing our firearm statutes is not an attack on anyone's rights. Yes, it is. This idea that you need to modernize statutes is infrequently, if not rarely, garbage. It's nonsense. There's no need to modernize our firearm statutes. Okay. The reason that you should support any bill is because the bill is needed, right? There, there needs to be a reason to pass any bill. Now, I am not the libertarian type who is an anarchist and opposes all government. I leave room for a tiny, tiny little shred like this much. Like our government's like this. Imagine like a big, huge ball, and I'm like, we should have like a marble, like one of those small marbles. That's where I see government. And so when I look at bills, I generally oppose them because I don't like how they read, or I don't think that they're solving an actual problem that needs to be solved. That's the issue for me. So in this particular case, he's just saying like, well, we're modernizing it. Okay. But why? We don't pass bills so they can be more modern. Okay. That's ridiculous because it assumes that prior bills were insufficient. And it's up to the legislator who's presenting this bill and saying we're going to pass it on behalf of the public. It's on them to explain why it needs modernized. So the idea that it needs modernized is nonsense because ultimately the real reason to increase, say, in this particular case, make gun laws more strict would be because they are needed to solve a particular problem. Modernizing in itself is not a problem. The problem would be we have this action that's going on here. We need to pass this legislation in order to prevent or stop it. And then they make their case, and then the public can either support it or oppose it based on the case that they're making. All right, let's see what else they get. The House rejected most of the amendments proposed during a long debate, but following criticism from the Massachusetts Chief of Police Association, lawmakers amended the measure to allow off-duty police officers, to carry their weapons in otherwise prohibited public places like schools and government buildings. Now, what's not clear to me, and I didn't see, is whether or not the police chief association found this to be acceptable enough, or if they still had criticism. The bill, I mean, I'm sorry, the the news article here kind of suggests that it wasn't because previously up here it said they passed the bill over the opposition of owners and police chiefs, and then down here they just make this one reference to uh, the police chief association saying, "Hey, this would this would prohibit police officers from carrying their weapons in otherwise prohibited places." And we should be able to do that. But the reality is everybody should be whatever the police can carry, wherever the police can carry, a citizen should have the same exact right. Period. That's where I am with this. All right. Let's see. Any more I want to read out of this? This is an interesting part here. So let's bring this up on the screen. Supporters of the bill said the new restrictions are needed to make the state, which has among the lowest rates of gun violence in the country, even safer. So, um, today, House lawmakers have sent a resounding message. We will act to end gun violence in our Commonwealth, said Donna Stevenson of the Massachusetts chapter of Moms Demand Action in a statement. Okay, so Whenever you see gun control legislation, moms demand action, not far behind. But here's the thing. That's not making a case that it's needed. Okay. I know from their perspective, they look at it and they say, hey, any gun violence, all gun violence needs to end. And therefore, we will not stop until we end all gun violence. But the reality is, that's not possible. It is simply not a reality. We need to, as the public, operate in reality. There are over 300 million Americans in the United States. Somebody will will engage in violence in some way against another person. You cannot stop all instances of violence. You cannot stop all instances of violence with the police because we have many documented cases where the police themselves, the people that groups like Moms Demand Action would absolutely support, we have documented situations where the police have engaged in wrongful violence, immoral, illegal violence against another person. Okay. So we need to operate in reality and get away from this notion that if we can make it safer, then we should. That is not a problem to solve. A problem to solve is, hey, we have this situation. Let's take it away from the gun situation. A problem to solve might be like, hey, there's this situation where these people are defrauding other people, and there is no current measure that either prevents it or offers restitution to the person who's being defrauded. Therefore, we would like to include that into our law. That would be solving a particular problem. And we need to push back against, those of us who are in the liberty sphere who support the Second Amendment. We need to push back and say, no, you're not solving a problem. You're just taking an opportunity to say, well, we can do more. And as long as they pass legislation, then they get to say, we've done more. And nobody holds them accountable. For instance, to hold them accountable, we should say, oh, you want to pass this legislation? Or, hey, let's look at the last legislation that you passed. What benefit did the public get? And that tends to get pretty tricky, right? Because everybody's got their version of how that bill turned out. But usually what ends up happening is these kind of groups say, well, we need to do more. It's not enough. It's not enough. Okay. Well, if it's not enough, maybe you're going down the wrong path. Maybe the fact that you keep having to pass more bills because it's not enough tells us that you're going in the wrong direction in the first place. All right. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I actually am going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to play a video clip of you for you. It is about 6 minute clip. It's of from a guy named Colin Noir. I think it's called Colin. Yeah, Colin Noir, I think is how he pronounces his name. He is an attorney, and he's a very strong advocate of Second Amendment. Very intelligent guy, and I think he kind of packs all of this bill um, into a nice, neat 6 minute segment. So I'm going to actually play this clip from Colin, and I might stop it a few times just as we're going along because I want to add a few things in there. So let's go ahead and start playing this clip.
So, Massachusetts was never really the most pro gun state in the world. It actually was not very pro gun at all, come to think of it. And now they're doing this.
So Massachusetts is in the process of overhauling its gun laws. House Democrats introduced a sweeping piece of legislation last month that would essentially rewrite them.
But a gun owners group says the proposal violates the Constitution.
1 year after the Supreme Court struck down the concealed carry law in Massachusetts, Representative Michael Day introduced House Bill 4420, an act modernizing firearm laws.
There can be no dispute that gun violence is on the rise, certainly around the country, but even here in Massachusetts where we have great laws.
The bill rewrites licensing procedures, revamps regulations for training and selling firearms, and expands extreme risk protection orders, also known as red flag laws. It also cracks down on ghost guns.
This is really intending to get at those that are evading our code of laws through the advancement of technology and criminal behavior.
It's so overwhelming No lawful citizen would be able to comply if this passes. Nobody.
Jim Wallace with the Gun Owners Action League said the new bill goes too far and makes legally owning a gun complicated and confusing.
Okay, so let's pause this here for just a moment, because I want to show you something here on this other tab that I've got. So I want to come over here, and I want you to look over to the right. You see where it says similar bills. So this is House Bill 4139, an act modernizing firearm laws. And then we look over here under similar bills, and we see three, three other bills, right? House Bill 4135, an act modernizing firearm laws. 4607, an act modernizing firearm laws. 4420, an act modernizing firearm laws. Now, all of these bills are going through the House. These bills, and I don't think they've gotten to this point in the video yet, but these bills are over 100 pages long. It's insane how long they are. And so what was that comment that lawmaker made? He said, oh yeah, modernizing our firearm statutes is not an attack on anyone's rights. It is an attack when you make when you make it so difficult for somebody to engage in their rights. It is an attack on their rights because there are three bills here. You would have to read hundreds of pages to know what these bills say. But even more so, and I'm not going to pull the bills up, but when you read the bill, they reference the existing statute and they'll say something like, in this section of the statute, we're going to remove this section and we're going to replace it with this section. So then it's not even as simple as just reading the bill in itself, because then you have to go and you have to look and say, here's what it says presently. Here's what they want it to say in this section, this section, this section, and all the way through 100 and some pages. And so it makes it difficult for you, the public, the people whose rights they're talking about. It makes it difficult for you to even know what changes are they trying to make and whether or not you even agree with it. So, I mean, this is an attack on your right. And I will go as far as saying it's more than just an attack on your Second Amendment right. It's an attack on your right for representation. Because how do you know that the lawmakers are even properly representing you if you have to spend so much time trying to figure out what they even want to do? Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to that video and let's keep playing it real quick.
These laws are more convoluted. They didn't streamline the process like they said they were going to do.
Obviously, you've heard some of their response or some of the criticisms. One of the big ones is that this overcomplicates an already complicated gun law. What is your response to that?
I think if you sit down and read it and look at what it actually will do, it simplifies it considerably. It also, I think.
Okay, so again, he's like, well, I think if you just sit down and read it. Well, people have jobs, Mr. Representative. I'm not sure who that particular lawmaker is. People have jobs, sir. We have things to do. We've got families. We've got to go outside and take care of our yard. We have a life to live. We don't have time to sit down and just read a bill. And because it's not as simple, like I said, as just reading a bill, sir. We have to compare what you want it to, or what you want the statute to say, to what it already says, and then try to identify, is that something that we even want? Let's continue on.
Think gives our tools, our law enforcement professionals, and our neighborhoods the tools they need to combat rising gun violence.
So if this bill's passed, it will make Massachusetts one of the most anti-gun states in the country. And that's saying a lot when you have anti-gun states like New York and California to compete with. But when you look closer at the proposed measures in this bill, you quickly realize that Massachusetts has lost its damn mind. I kid you not. This bill bans the ability to shoot at silhouette targets at a gun range. No, seriously, all those targets that are in the shape of people, you won't be able to shoot.
Like, okay, so let me stop it. I trust Colian a lot. I watched a lot of his stuff. He's got good content. I'm not gonna lie. I actually fact checked him on this, and it does say this. It actually says that you're not allowed to shoot at targets. I think it's specific to a certain type of club. Regardless, it's in there. It's in the bill that there's a limitation on shooting at targets that look like human figures. But let's be real. If you're shooting at somebody in self-defense, it is a human. You should probably have practice so that you only shoot the person that is threatening you. That only makes sense. Let's continue on. I apologize to Colian for fact checking him, but I was kind of like, what?
Shoot at them anymore. How is this saving lives? Looks more like tyrannical control and mental conditioning to me, but who am I? This bill will require not only all guns be registered, but also each and every magazine. It also bans anyone under the age of 21 from buying or carrying a semi-auto rifle or a shotgun. I guess 18, 19, and 20-year-olds aren't allowed to protect themselves anymore. You won't even be able to carry a firearm on private property unless you get permission. Hell, if you're under the age of 18, you won't even be able to defend yourself with mace. And if you have a stun gun, you'll have to register it because it's added as a gun by definition under this new bill. The bill will also allow the police to demand you show your permit for no reason, which essentially is stop and frisk by another name. To make matters worse, your employers, school administrators, and certain medical professionals can go to a judge and ask them to suspend your license if they think you're at risk to harm yourself or others, which sounds great on papers, until you realize this happens before you get to even prove your case. Keep in mind, this bill is 140 pages of gun laws. I just told you about a few of them. The local police don't even support this bill. So much so, the Ware Police Department put a warning about the bill on their Facebook page. And I quote, "A plethora of blatantly unconstitutional proposals litter this travesty of a bill. Too many to mention here. However, of particular egregiousness is the criminalization of carrying firearms in certain so-called prohibited locations, including businesses and private properties, even while holding a valid license to carry. Not even off-duty police officers will be exempted from this appalling mandate." The disgusting thing about this bill is that it's purely in response to the Supreme Court ruling that a state can't deny someone a carry permit simply because their need for one isn't special enough.
Okay, so he's getting ready to get into this issue that I raised a moment ago. What problem are you trying to solve? This is the issue that I have with a lot of bills is one, they're either not really trying to solve a problem or they're telling the public, hey, we're going to do this thing. They're telling us one thing, but the problem they're actually solving is something else. So listen closely here.
So this is Massachusetts' way of trying to backdoor the law. Essentially, you have the right to carry on paper, but in the real world, you're not allowed to carry it at all, actually. And if you need more evidence that the anti-gun lobby and their politicians are lying when they say they just want so-called common sense gun laws, listen to what the Democrat representative who introduced the bill said about the bill. While the Commonwealth's gun laws are among the best in the nation, unrelenting acts of violence and the Supreme Court's deleterious Bruin decision demand legislative action both here in Massachusetts and on the federal level, Speaker Mariano said on the day the legislation was unveiled, according to WWLP. So they're basically saying, we already have all the common sense gun control that we said we wanted, but that wasn't enough. So we're going to ask for more gun control. I keep telling people, they will never, ever, ever, ever stop.
Right. They will never, ever, ever stop. Let me read that quote from the very beginning here. Again, where I think it's a good quote in general, but apparently lawmakers have gotten that message. An opportunity is merely an occasion on which successful action is possible. It is a situation that an individual can take advantage of to his gain. What needs to be realized about opportunities is, first of all, that there is no scarcity of them. They arise again and again. And this is what's happening with our lawmakers. They keep finding opportunities. In this particular case, as Colian is making the point, they not acknowledge we have some of the best laws, gun laws in the nation. I'd argue with that, but let's just go with it. They're saying we have some of the best gun laws in the nation, but here's this opportunity based on what the Supreme Court said for us to enact further gun laws. It's crazy.
They're not even hiding it at this point. They're telling you, yeah, we have really strong gun laws, but it's not enough. We want more, and we'll keep calling it common sense gun laws because you idiots keep falling for it. Nothing about this bill is about keeping people safe. It's literally the state throwing a temper tantrum because of the Bruin decision that said you can't make people specify special need to get a carry permit. So this is Massachusetts legislature saying, fine, if we can't keep people from carrying guns, we're going to make carrying a gun so hard and convoluted and difficult, you won't even bother, which means the only people who have guns then when they're out and about will be the criminals. So what can you do to try to stop this? Well, I'll let the Ware Police Department tell you what you can do. Communicate with your elected representatives. Reach out to your local, state, and federal representatives to express your concerns about the bill. Write letters and make phone calls to ensure your voice is heard. And that's not me saying it. That is the police department saying it.
Think about that for a moment. The police department is telling you this bill is so bad, even we oppose it on your behalf. So, people of Massachusetts, if you don't get it through your head that this bill is so bad that even the police are recommending that you call your legislators and throw a fit and tell them, absolutely not, you deserve what you get. And I don't mean that lightly. I mean, like, this is your opportunity to lay it out for them and to tell them no. It's crazy. I like imagine a bill so bad on gun control that even the police oppose it. That's wild.
Saying that. And for those of you who feel like, oh, well, I don't live in Massachusetts, so I ain't worried about it. Use the words from the person who brought this bill as a warning. Mariano added that he hopes their work in Massachusetts will serve as a national model for Congress and other states. You know, quiet as kept, gun control not only doesn't keep people safe, it's expensive to implement and run. It's been calculated to cost on the low end 3.2 billion and 16 billion on the high end just to do a national gun buyback. That's why I came up with the defund gun control design. The defund gun control movement is about divesting our precious resources from useless and unconstitutional gun control laws and focusing those resources on addressing the underlying issues and protecting the Second Amendment instead of forcing the American people to pay for the violation of their Second Amendment right.
How about that? All right, so some great words from Coley and Noor. I would have absolutely loved to have actually read through the bill, but it's a very difficult bill to read through in this particular case because it references statutes. Normally, when I read a bill and I'm doing a bill review, it'll have like the whole statute, and what they'll do is they'll strike out the part they want to remove, and then they will underline the part that they want to add. So it makes reading it a little bit easier because it's all sitting right there in one document. In this particular bill, when I looked it up, what it did was it said, okay, in section such and such of this the state statute under this chapter, under this part, we want to remove this and replace it with this. And but it didn't have the full context of everything. So then I had to pull up the state statute and then like literally sit there and look at them and say, okay, they want to remove this, they want to add this. All right, now let me try to read the context of what's going on here so I can understand what the impact of this change is. So it makes it very, very difficult. And again, let me pull this up real quick. Um, there it goes. Again, when we talk about these bills, one, not solving a problem, but two, an infringement on your rights because they make it difficult. They don't just make it difficult for you to utilize your to engage in your civic your inherent right of self-defense and to carry a firearm and to own a firearm. They make it difficult on your representation as well because, as I pointed out, there are three bills that are similar, and you would have to read all of these bills. Now, I think the process is they've got these different bills and they kind of merge together and whatnot, and then they go through amendment process. So it is actually pretty difficult for the average citizen to just sit down and read it, as that one lawmaker said, because that was his answer when he was asked by the news reporter, well, hey, what about the criticism that this makes everything much more difficult to understand? He's like, well, just read the bill. Like, really? Just read the bill? Like, we all just got time just to sit down and read the bill? You know? 140 pages for one bill. And then you've got other bills that are over 100 pages. And then you have to try to figure out which bill is getting merged into which other bill, and then which one actually gets passed, and then what's the impact of it. What does the current statute say? That is a lot of effort, all for the sake of they're basically solving the problem of the Supreme Court. That's what they're doing. They're solving the problem of the Supreme Court, because nowhere did I read where they said, here is this tangible problem that we have that we are going to solve with this legislation, and here is the legislation that we're looking to pass. What do you think of it, Joe Public? All right. So that's the segment on this bill. I hope you keep an eye on the gun bills. To me, the Second Amendment is an extremely important amendment, and there is no shortage of people trying to either take it away entirely. There's people out there with that conversation, or trying to be a little bit more clever and saying, well, we're not trying to infringe on it. We're just trying to improve safety. It's all bunk. So don't buy it. All right, so let's move on. I've got a couple more clips, and we're going to move on to the next item here, which let's see here where we go. So it's going to be, I've got two videos, and this is regarding child labor. So we're going to talk a little bit about child labor, and this is actually a new bill that's coming out of Hawaii. And again, I didn't read the bill. I mean, I did read the bill, but I'm not going to read the bill here. We're actually just going to kind of go through some media items, and I think it'll be a little bit easier to understand and a lot less dry at 7 a.m. in the morning. So let's take a look at this first video here, and we'll get a sense of what's going on here, because and unlike the other bill, this bill actually has a problem to solve. So let's go ahead and see what we can find.
Tonight, alarming accusations about what happened inside this Nebraska meatpacking plant. Migrant children like this boy, who federal investigators say was put to work in a job that can be incredibly dangerous. Could anybody mistake these children for adults?
I don't think there's any mistaking these children for adults.
Investigators say the child workers arrived for their shift at night, many of them from Central America. They were employed by cleaning company Packer Sanitation Services, Inc. to sanitize equipment inside the plant. PSSI has 17,000 workers. Of those, investigators say the company employed more than 100 children, aged 13 to 17, and 13 plants across 8 states. Last October, labor investigators say they found nearly 24 children, some as young as 13, working here inside this massive slaughterhouse, cleaning up blood and animal parts in the overnight shift. Nebraska immigrant advocate Audrey Lutz has been helping some of the child workers from Guatemala, who she says are scared to talk to us.
I think these youth are afraid because they don't know the systems in this country that were meant to protect them, because those systems failed.
Okay, so let's take a pause here for just a second. Let's talk about a couple things. So there are two issues that I want to, well, several issues actually. So number one, when it comes to child labor, I am not entirely opposed to the idea of people under the age having jobs. Now, I do think there is a limit, and that limit in this particular case, I would agree that if you are 13, 14, 15, if you're under the age of 18, I don't believe it's proper for you to be working at a place that is dangerous, or at least in the job that is dangerous. Okay. The reason for that, everybody owns their own self. We have determined in society that 18 is the line that we draw for the age at which you can consent what happens to your body. This means you can consent to intimate activity with other adults. This means you can consume things like alcohol and cigarettes and other things that aren't so good for your health. This means that you can sign up for the military, which you could end up losing your life if you got deployed over to a conflict. This means you can sign a contract that you are legally obligated to fulfill, right? So there are certain things. So I am not opposed to the idea of saying certain things require you to be a certain age in order for you to be able to consent. Same thing goes with dangerous jobs. Certain jobs, I believe that you need to be 18, which is the line that we've drawn. I recognize that it can be a bit on the arbitrary side. We know we all have probably met a 17-year-old who is much more mature and can make better decisions than, say, a 25-year-old, or even in some cases, a 30 and 40-year-old. Okay. But we have drawn the line at the age of 18. So I'm comfortable with that. Now, let me give you a story that happened in my own life regarding somebody who actually was 18. So you may remember that I've talked about this particular job. I think I talked about it in an episode either yesterday or the day before. It was a job where I was a I was working in the capacity of a industrial engineer, basically process management, and my job was to help move a facility from one building to another while we were delivering parts to the customer. Okay. And this was a big deal. So we had 17 people underneath me. Not all of them were people from our company. Some of them had been sent to us from one of those those like oh, what are they called? Like the workforce type places. And one of the guys was 18. Okay. So they were all legal age, and he was 18, and we had nothing that was inherently super dangerous. Okay, it wasn't a meat packing facility. We didn't have anything, the sharpest thing that we would have would be like a box cutter to open literally a box. Okay, like, so technically, yes, there were some things that could be safety issues, but there was nothing that was inherently super dangerous, right? It was all relatively straightforward. And if you just had a good head on your shoulders, then probably going to be fine. Now, this guy, he was a great worker. He did everything that I asked of him. He did make one mistake, and it almost cost him severely. You may have seen some of those huge industrial fans. Like the big ones are like huge. They got like, I don't know, maybe like 3 feet in diameter, and they stand up. They're on a stand and they're like 6 feet tall, and they blow a huge amount of wind because people are working in a warehouse, and because the doors are open and it's hot in the summer. That's the way to help cool things down, because of the nature of the work, people are going in and out, and so you weren't able to necessarily have AC. And in this particular case, specifically, this building that we inherited was a very old building. So it didn't even have a good system in the first place. One of the reasons why we were moving. So this fan was running, and he went to move it without unplugging it. And he apparently grabbed it by the grill that's around the fan blades. And there were a couple areas in the grill where it had been bent, and his thumb slipped through. And he ended up going to the hospital. We're not going to get into the gory details. Went to the hospital. I got called, and hey, one of the guys, one of the temp workers, he is over at the hospital now. He had an incident with his thumb and this fan, and so I had to, rush over there to see what happened. Luckily for him, there was no permanent significant damage, um, but it was a mistake that was made. So I get it. I get the idea that our young people, whether they're U.S. citizens or not, our young people don't always make the best decisions. In this particular case, I think he made a foolish decision, but I think he otherwise was trying to do a good job. He just happened to not think it through. He was being a regular 18-year-old guy who thought, I'll just move this fan really quickly out of my way. He should have unplugged it, waited for the fan blade to stop, then moved it, or slid it over with the base, anything other than grabbing the grill while it was running. So I understand the idea. I don't want 15-year-olds in dangerous jobs where they could lose their life, because 15-year-olds have not demonstrated the ability to properly weigh out decisions. They, in my mind, cannot consent to that kind of dangerous work. But that doesn't mean that they cannot consent to work at all. And one of the things that I wanted to point out in that video, if you just saw it a moment ago, and we'll continue watching it here in a second, but one of the things I want to point out that she said there were teenagers cleaning up blood and guts. Okay. If you're just cleaning up blood and guts, I don't have so much a problem with that. Now you could argue and say, hey, there could be some infectious diseases and so on and so forth. So you can make that argument, and that's fine. It's the particular equipment that they might be using. And we'll come across what I mean by that in a moment. But let's continue on with this video here. Oh, better view.
He spoke to a former PSSI manager who asked that we conceal their identity.
Did you ever see kids, people who looked like kids, working inside these plants?
Yeah,
How young do you think they were?
probably as young as 12.
How did that strike you when you saw someone that young working a job like this?
It kind of makes you sick. You walk through the plant, you can't walk through it without getting animal parts on you or blood all over you.
The company disciplined an employee in 2021, according to an internal PSSI report reviewed by NBC News. The employee, who handled hiring for multiple plants, was found to have hired the same known minor 2 separate times in the span of 6 months under 2 different names. The punishment, according to the document, a demotion and a hiring policy review.
Were managers ever worried that they'd be disciplined for hiring children?
No.
The former manager says the more common outcome was to hold the frontline worker accountable.
You would just terminate the child, terminate the undocumented worker.
In December, the company signed a consent decree saying they would abide by child labor laws.
Okay, so that's kind of weird. Let's go back to that. Let's scroll this back just a wee bit here. They signed a consent decree saying they would abide by child labor law. Like, I don't even understand what that means, because as I understand it, they don't have a choice but to abide by child labor. Like, laws are imposed. There is no there's no consent needed. Like, I don't understand that. But anyway, let's keep going.
Laws. PSSI telling NBC News our company has a strong corporate commitment to our zero tolerance policy against employing anyone under the age of 18, and fully shares the Labor Department's objective of ensuring full compliance at all locations.
Okay, so let me just make this point really quickly, because I think it's very necessary. If they had that commitment, they wouldn't be caught with people under the age of 18, period. So I think they're either lying to themselves or to the public, but they're lying to somebody, because this is when I was a young lad, when I joined the military, and I went down to I had my basic training in South Carolina, and then I went on to Augusta, Georgia, where I had my advanced individual training. I was there for 6 months, and I was like 19. I had a commitment to not messing around with any girl that was under the age of 18. And you know what? I never did, because I had an actual real commitment. So when a company says, well, we're committed to doing this, but somehow it keeps happening, they're lying. They're lying to somebody, themselves or to you, the public. And they should be held accountable. Now, how should they be held accountable? Like, I think we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. All right. So let's continue watching this. We'll continue watching this video here real quick. All right, it's almost over, and then we'll move on to the second video, which has a little bit more interesting details.
And says they are taking steps to prevent individuals at the local level from circumventing our wide-ranging procedures. Shannon Roboyedo was the lead investigator for the Labor Department.
How is this investigation different from what you've seen before?
I've never seen child labor violations to this extent. Just the sheer number of kids that were working. I've never had an employer or their representative impede my investigation like this, just so brazenly.
PSSI says it was fully cooperative in the Labor Department's investigation.
All right. So they were fully cooperative. And then we have another video here that we're going to go through, and we're going to watch this video. So this one is a little bit, this one has some more details. Let's put it that way. And this is only 2 minutes. And then we're going to go on to the bill that we'll talk about, this bill that's going to address this.
We're back now with an NBC News investigation on child labor in the U.S. and the young migrant who has become the latest fatality inside a Mississippi poultry plant. Julia Ainsley reports, and a warning, some of the details you're about to hear are disturbing.
Tonight, the family of Duvan Tomas Perez sharing horrific new details about his death, describing how the Guatemalan teenager was killed while cleaning machinery at a poultry plant in Mississippi. The family devastated. Duvan's uncle saying he put his hand on the machine and his whole body was pulled in, where he couldn't stop himself, and nobody could help him. Family members and the local coroner say Duvan was just 16. He was working at Marjack Poultry in Hattiesburg. Police confirm his body was found trapped in a conveyor belt. The company says it relies on staffing agencies and was unaware a minor was working at the facility, adding Marjack MS would never knowingly put any employee, and certainly not a minor, in harm's way. But it appears at this point in the investigation that this individual's age and identity were misrepresented on the paperwork.
Okay, so let's pause this for a moment. So remember what I just said, that when I was a young lad and I was down in Augusta, Georgia, and I had a commitment to not messing around with any girl that was under the age of 18. I didn't make any mistakes, right? Like it's possible that I get it. Some guys are like, oh, look, if you have a commitment, you will meet that commitment, particularly in this case. This company is saying like they're deferring and they're saying, well, it's the staffing agency. They're the ones that are doing this and they're circumventing our procedures. But no, your procedures. There's an interesting quote that I learned when I was a process when I worked with processes, kind of like an industrial engineer, and it goes like this: your process is perfectly designed to give you the results that you are getting. Their process is perfectly designed to give them the results that they are getting. They are getting repeated instances of minors that may not even be legal immigrants. They're getting repeated instances of this because their procedures allow it. So don't let them fool you. Don't let them lie to you or themselves. Okay. And we're going to get into the bill that addresses this and whether or not it's even a good bill. But let's continue watching real quick. We only got about another minute on this video. Maybe not. Yeah, about another minute.
Under U.S. law, no one under the age of 18 is allowed to work dangerous jobs in meat processing plants.
I
A
agree.
recent Labor Department investigation found more than 100 children cleaning slaughterhouse floors in the Midwest overnight. Labor Department officials say child labor violations are up by 69% since
Okay, so
2018.
let's pause this for just a moment here. So child labor violation, this is where I'm going to nitpick a little bit with the NBC News here. Child labor violations are up 69%, but they don't tell you what violations, right? They just told you that they found what was 100. I think they said 100. Let's roll that back here real quick. We can look back at it. They said there was there it is. More than 100 children cleaning slaughterhouse floors in the Midwest overnight. That I'm going to take a wild guess, and I'm going to say that 100 kids that they have, where did it go here? Where is it? There we go. Those 100 kids are not the 69% up since 2018. So I think that they're being a little bit disingenuous here in saying, okay, I think they're taking the totality of child labor violations and putting it all together and saying all of them are up 69%. And then they're reporting on the most dangerous ones, which is a little bit deceiving. So a little bit nitpicking there, because at the end of the day, when we're supporting bills or opposing bills, we have to understand the facts of the situation. We cannot pass bills without understanding the extent or, first and foremost, what problem exists, and then second, the extent of the problem. We have to have this information. Otherwise, we're simply passing bills that may do absolutely nothing. Let's continue on. Got about 30 seconds left.
Since 2018. The agency now investigating Duvan's death and possible child labor violations by Marjack. The company says it's cooperating. Tonight, family and friends remembering Duvan. One saying he said goodbye to his grandmother, his family members, and sadly, he's returning in a box. Julia Ainsley, NBC News.
All right. So it's a very, very sad situation. Now, I'm not necessarily personally opposed to the idea that a child might work in a particular facility that has dangerous equipment. But I do think that they cannot consent to working some jobs because the jobs are simply too dangerous and they are not yet at an age for which they can consent to using their body in that way. This is the same concept as I would say a 15-year-old cannot consent to having an intimate relationship with somebody who's, 30, 40, whatever years old. Like, I mean, we'll excuse some Romeo and Juliet laws, but otherwise, there is an issue of consent. And I don't believe that a minor can consent to that kind of work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't be in the facility at all. Maybe they can work, um, you know, in an office related job or some other job. Now, let's move on to this bill here because I'm gonna what's really interesting about this is sometimes bills, when they're put out, the person who introduces the bill, they give a nice little summary like on their website, which I can appreciate. It doesn't always happen, but I appreciate when they do this. So let's go ahead and let's pull up this bill that's going to address child labor, and this is at the national level, and let's see what we make of this bill. So this is from Brian Schatz out of he's a U.S. Senator for Hawaii. Um, introduced new legislation to help stop child labor. Okay, so that's the problem that he wants to solve. He wants to stop child labor. Okay. Bipartisan bill establishes new criminal penalties, imposes new steep fines for employers who violate child labor laws. All right. Let's see. I don't think it's too long. I can probably read a good portion of this. We are getting up close to time. I might have to go a little bit over. U.S. Senators Brian Schatz and Todd Young from Indiana this week introduced new legislation to help stop illegal child labor. So now we've changed the dynamic a little bit. So now we're going to stop illegal child labor. Okay. The bipartisan Stop Child Labor Act would increase maximum fines for violations, establish new criminal penalties, allow victims harmed by violations to file private lawsuits, and encourage collaboration between employers and government to stop child labor violations before they occur. It's a very interesting point. To stop child labor violations before they occur. Let's address that in just a moment. But let's go down here. We're going to skip some of this other information. We're going to go to stop child labor and hold bad employers accountable. The Stop Child Labor Act would, one, increase child labor violation civil penalties, and they've listed specific amounts. So they go from so they go to a $132,000 maximum for routine violations, and then a $600,000 maximum for each violation that causes the death or serious injury of a minor. And then they're going to create criminal penalties for repeat or willful violation of child labor laws to include a fine up to $50,000 and a year in jail. And then they're going to allow children harmed by violations of the law to seek compensation. And they're going to start a grant program aimed at helping employers recognize, avoid, and prevent child labor violations, and then permanently establish a national advisory committee on child labor. And then there's a link to the full text of the bill. So I did kind of read through the bill a little bit. All right, so here's some elements that I'm not actually a big fan of this bill, because remember what they're trying to do up here, we'll come back to this in a moment, is help stop illegal child labor. And they're talking about stories where 15 and 16-year-olds have been working with deadly equipment or very dangerous equipment, and in some cases has had a deadly outcome. Okay, so what they're going to do is they're going to just increase penalties, fines. Okay, so remember up here they said they're going to stop child labor violations before they occur. But then everything here, all the penalties are only if they get caught, which means after they occur. So this bill actually doesn't do anything to help prevent it before they occur. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here's the thing. Get back to, no, we'll leave that up. That's fine. No, yeah, let's do this. All right. So what do I mean by that? Well, think of it this way. Why was this child working in this place? Why was that? Why were they working at the meat packing plant in the first place? Presumably, they had no other alternatives. Because at the end of the day, even though a child may not be able to consent, even though they may be under the age for which they can make good decisions, which generally they are, that doesn't mean they can't make any good decisions, nor does it mean they can't weigh out what may be a better opportunity. So, what I don't like about this bill is it doesn't do anything to free up other opportunities that would cause a teenager to say, I don't want to work there. That place is dangerous. I could totally work over here and it's going to be way better for me. They may not be able to judge they may not be able to evaluate risk and say, is this an appropriate, you know, should I be doing this? Right. Like how many 15-year-olds, you jump off the roof and do something crazy, right? Like they do things that are stupid. I get it. I was one of them. But that doesn't mean that I can't entirely make a decision and say, I would rather do this than this, because I can kind of judge to some degree. And this bill doesn't do any of that. Now, let me go back to something that I criticized a while ago. There was a young man in Chicago. His name was, and I should have looked it up because now I'm going to forget his name. And I don't think I'm just not gonna be able to remember his name. But he was a 13-year-old boy and he was shot by the police. He was shot by the police at like 2:30 in the morning on like a 2:30 on a Saturday morning, I think. Or no, maybe it was a weekday. It might have been a weekday morning. Um, but he was out and about with a 21-year-old man and doing whatever, God knows what. And there was a big outcry of that. And I looked it up and I started reviewing and I realized that because he was 13, the the age which um, work opportunities starting to open up for a child in Illinois is 14. Now you don't have a lot. Like it's like if you're under 14, then you're very, very limited. I think 14 and 15-year-old, you're a little bit less limited. Then things really start opening up for you about 16 and 17. Then of course, when you're 18, you can do pretty much any job you want. So I looked at it and I said, there was nothing to compete for his time. His time was his option was go to bed and be a good student. Go to bed at a reasonable hour, wake up, go to school, do the things that you're supposed to do, or go hang out with your buddy. And my argument at the time was because of the laws in place, they prevented him from having a competing idea for somebody who probably didn't have a great home life. Because I assume that he was out and about at 2:30 in the morning because his home life allowed for it. Right? It's not always true. Totally get it. I understand. Sometimes when I was a kid, my mama was really on the ball, but sometimes I was able to fool her. Not very often, but sometimes. So I totally get it. But the point here is that we need to loosen up some of the laws that allow kids to make better decisions on a more broad basis, right? I get it. They're not going to necessarily judge their risk, but what was the reason that he was there in the first place? 16 years old. Why wasn't he in school? Why wasn't he at some other job? Probably because of things like minimum wage, um, or other restrictions. And so, for whatever reason, apparently in this particular company, they relied on some other service, so they say, to bring people in. My assumption, I don't know this for sure, but in my opinion, they probably were like, let me see if I could do this right. They probably were like, no, we don't hire anybody that's under the age of 18, right? That's probably what they were like. They were probably reaching out and saying, look, you find me somebody. Well, this person's underage. I don't want to know about it. You find me somebody, right? That kind of conversation where you can totally can say, well, look, I didn't consent to that. I didn't agree. I follow the law. Yeah, you follow the law if you know what's happening. But if you tell people to make stuff happen, right? So ultimately, I think that when we look at a bill like this, all it does is increase the penalties and says if you get caught and this bad thing happens, you get a huge fine. So depends on the company, they could make a business decision and they'll make that business decision partially on are they likely to get caught? Right? This is not preventing the kid from being there in the first place. This is just saying we're going to make the punishment so great that we hope that you will not hire these young people. But what they don't do is they don't do anything to create a circumstance where that child would actually not want to be there in the first place. Since we're talking about illegal immigrants, presumably they came over here because whatever option they had available to them was less. I assume since they were talking to his family in what was it, Ecuador, that he came over here quietly to work and send money back to his family. In other words, there was no other option for him here to come and work in any other situation, right? Other than to follow a very rigorous path. But then he was 16. So let's assume that he comes over here. Well, he can't come over here by himself and live. So our immigration is a problem. Because he's an immigrant and he's under the age of 18, he would be required to go to school or seek out emancipation. So, in other words, you've got this huge, insurmountable challenge. But ultimately, the problem, I'm assuming, that he was trying to solve was my family needs money. And so I'm going to go to the US and I'm going to go in this hidden path and I'm going to work at this place under the radar and I'm going to send money back to my family because they didn't interview anybody from his family here in the US. So I can only assume that he was here illegally and for the purpose of trying to send money to his family who was probably in need. If we want to change things, the better solution is to open the doors of opportunity. I read them at the top of the show that there are never there are always opportunities available unless our laws prevent those opportunities. Now, there was one thing about the bill that I did actually like. It said allow children harmed by violations of the law to seek compensation. I actually agree with that. I think that that's where they should have put the huge violations. I'm sorry, the huge monetary the amount of money where they said, okay, like to increase child labor violation civil penalties, they're going to go from a $5,000 minimum to a $132,000 minimum or maximum for routine violations, and then a $25,000 minimum and $600,000 maximum for each violation that causes the death or serious injury of a minor. That money, that compensation should have been specified, and maybe it was in the bill. I didn't see it, but maybe it was somewhere and I just missed it. But they should move that portion to the, hey, children harmed by violations of the law can seek compensation, and they can seek compensation of a great amount. And it should have been even if the person is illegal, because guess what? If you said a 16-year-old who is not a legal resident of the United States can seek compensation from you if there's a serious injury or a violation, well, it's hard to argue that the child themselves would be able to work because now every employer knows if I hire somebody who I think is 18 and a legal resident, but it turns out they're 16 and they're illegal and they can sue me, they're going to put a lot more effort into making sure that this person is who they say they are, right? So you create incentives on both sides there, right? You create an incentive for the actual individual who's harmed to seek compensation, and you put the compensation because what is the government? A fine is just the government getting compensation. That's all that is. And it doesn't appear that they've got any better processes that are going to help prevent them in the first place. They're just simply raising the fine. So it's basically we're raising the cost to do business. So I think that this bill is not so impressive. It sounds good. Hey, we're going to make it more costly for you to do this, but that's only if you get caught. And then it really doesn't free up any other opportunities that may cause a 16-year-old to say, you know what? Rather than working at this dangerous facility where I could get pulled into a piece of machinery, I'd rather go over here and work. But if for some reason I am working at a place and the company does me wrong, I have now legal recourse. Because remember in the first video, people were like, the woman was saying something to the effect of, people don't understand the laws. They don't know that the laws are there to protect them. That's because they're really not. That's why. People understand the laws that benefit them directly. And every person in Ecuador, Honduras, or anywhere else that wants to come here, they'll quickly learn if there is a law in place that directly benefits them that they can use even if they're not a legal immigrant. So that's what I got to say on these bills. I hope you enjoyed the show today. Let's see, 8:12. I'm a little bit overdue. So let's get to some comments here really quickly. DL the detective. I try. I'm a gumshoe at heart, I guess. And then Keith, I totally agree. Laws don't solve problems. They only provide rules and penalties. They really aren't solving a problem. I mean, just here on the show, as a small time podcast guy, I think I came up with a better solution for dealing with keeping our 16-year-olds safe and not being pulled into dangerous machinery. All right. Well, thank you for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. And then Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co host, Susan Hogarth, where we look across the vastness of tyranny here in this country and we find out what is it that's happening in the Libertarian Party at the state and local level. Then we bring it to you so that you can follow suit or join them in raising noise. We had that happen just about 2 weeks ago. We actually did that with a guy. He went to his town council and was fighting on behalf of a man to stay in a trailer on his granddaughter's property, for which the city said, "Hey, you can't do that." Um, Make sure you do all the proper audience actions. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.libertydad.com. Now on Rumble, streaming there. Hooray for me. Rumble.libertydad.com. Go over there. I know it's looking a little rough at the moment, but I promise you, baby steps, and we'll eventually be there, and it'll be looking nice and sharp. Also, make sure you do all things, ring the bell, like the videos, drop a word or two in the comment section. Follow me on social media, Liberty Dad at Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod on Twitter, or go old school, email me, libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would absolutely love to hear from you. Remember, you're a champion of liberty, your business is people, and your product is liberty. Have a great week. Catch you next time.